Welcome back to the B-Sides of Sports, Season 2, Episode 11, the season finale for Season 2. In today's episode, we're just kind of recapping the NBA season. Obviously, it was an important one, and I think a pretty cool one overall. Great playoffs, kind of a lackluster finals, but some very interesting storylines in the regular season. And so today we're just going to kind of be giving our thoughts on the last season, as well as we're looking forward, looking to next NBA season, what kind of some things we think are going to happen. So to open it up, we're just going to finish off with we're going to start off with talking about the finals still. Obviously, it's the hot button issue. And so, Wilson, again, what are your kind of takeaways for the Nuggets right now? You know, having seen their parade today, what do you think about their self-proclaimed title aspirations as well as their immediate future?
Yeah, I always think it's interesting the days after a new NBA champion is crowned, the way the media kind of wants to embrace the way that team won the title. And I think a lot of people want to come out and definitively say, these are the A, B, C, D things that this team did. That's the new formula for winning. And I think the truth is, when you look back over recent NBA history, there isn't necessarily a direct formula to winning. A lot of it's just you have to have the right pieces at the right time. If you have a heliocentric superstar that you can really just put all of your team's kind of, offensive, defensive firepower into and just really find the right pieces to mold around that one heliocentric player. I think that's really the formula at its core. But that being said, it looks different for every single team. And I think when we look at this Nuggets team, they have some similarities to what people have talked about with Golden State, with what Toronto was able to do, even what the Bucks did. That starts and ends with Nikola Jokic, obviously one of the all-time greats now, solidifying himself in NBA history. I kind of said on the last pod that I think Jokic is right outside of that elite circle of centers in NBA history, behind the Bill Russells, Wilt Chamberlains, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Shaquille O'Neal, and Hakeem Olajuwon. I think Jokic sits in the tier right below that, and that's a heck of an accomplishment for someone as early in his career as Jokic is. To go back to my earlier point about kind of the formula for winning a championship, I think culture and building your team internally are two of the takeaways we can take from this recent era of NBA history. A lot of people wanted to kind of claim it as the super team era. And I think when we go back and look at it, not a lot of super teams have really been created externally. A lot of it's been internal growth. Golden State obviously added the beast in Kevin Durant. A lot of those LeBron teams were bringing in other players. But when we look at just this recent stretch, there are pieces that are added, but the core, I think, always starts within building your team through the draft and just organically letting a team kind of build a chemistry, build an identity together, and finding a way to win through trials and tribulations. So to me, that's the way Denver was able to win. And I give all the credit to their top tier players. Again, Jokic, an incredible run. I think there are some interesting questions that we can ask. I think it's interesting to consider, where does Jamal Murray sit in the NBA hierarchy as it sits today? Is Michael Porter Jr. going to be able to justify that max contract? But I think all things considered, they've got a young core and I think they've got a bright future.
Yeah, no, I agree. But I think I kind of have to disagree kind of with, again, lightly, in terms of, you were talking about how, what made, these teams like the Warriors so well is they drafted so well. And that was kind of the key to building that culture. But I also think, again, what I think we don't talk about enough is a lot of the veteran presence that they had with guys like David West, Sean Livingston, Leandro Barbosa, getting the most out of guys who you don't really think about as stars, but they just contribute to winning so much you can't even explain it. Guys like KCP for me, Jeff Green, right? These are guys who have never been necessarily stars on a team, but just really good players. And I think you're right. Having that core is important, but I think there are plenty of teams with a great young core. The Raptors have had great young cores pretty much the entire time I've been a fan. The issue has been the veteran pieces they acquire, right? The 1 year they get Kawhi Leonard, that was an acquisition that really helped them. But then other years they're getting guys like this year, they got Will Barton, and he did next to nothing for him. And so again, you have that great young core that was just in the playoffs last year, but adding some pieces like that, getting guys like Gary Trent, who I love even, but just not using them correctly, or they don't mesh correctly. And so again, I do think you're right in that, but I also just think what the Nuggets did so well is pick up some of these guys who we weren't necessarily sure what they were, and then they contributed to winning. Aaron Gordon's another name. I know he's not necessarily nearly as much a veteran as a lot of those other guys were, but still, the factor of what he is, he wasn't drafted by them. They picked him up, and he's blossomed into a fantastic player, a fringe all-star. And also, I do agree, though. I think they do have kind of a winning recipe. I just think a lot of it depends on health more than anything, because Jamal Murray obviously is just now fully getting back to what he was pre-injury. So I think, the injury bug is something that can ruin any franchise. There's plenty, I always think of the early Portland years with like LaMarcus Aldridge, Brandon Roy, Greg Oden, right? Few injuries and you can knock off a fantastic core. So That's really, I think, the only thing that will stop them from at least being, one of those teams that's kind of like in the Western Conference Finals or right below it almost every single year.
And thank you for bringing that up. I think that's an important clarification, and it's a point that I completely agree with. I think on top of building your core internally, I think it is about adding the right pieces at the right time, especially bringing in that veteran presence. And you mentioned all the names, KCP, Jeff Green, Aaron Gordon, although he may not be an older player, he is a veteran in the league. He's been around for a very long time. Even a guy like Bruce Bowen, right? You have to bring in guys that are at the right stage in their career. I think what this Denver team understood is that they realized that the opportunity was not a given one, and that they had to take advantage of the moment. They felt like it was their year, and it was their year. And again, I think a lot of times with especially younger players and guys that haven't played together before, they don't have that same sense of urgency. But when you build the team internally, I think those guys have been in the locker room long enough to kind of understand one another and be on the same wavelength of what is the goal and how can we set about achieving it, and just having that laser-like focus. I think we really saw that. And to give credit to another person, Michael Malone, he's a guy that I had a little bit of doubt going into the finals. I think he proved a lot of us wrong, and although the leash for coaches in the NBA is rather short right now, I think he's, earned his way to staying there for the foreseeable future, as long as Jokic is there, most definitely.
For sure. And I think kind of just my last takeaway on the Nuggets is really, again, I touched on it last pod, but it's the Nikola Jokic factor. And that is that he is, as we've seen, not a guy who necessarily lives for basketball in a traditional sense, right? There's plenty of, articles coming out or in his press conferences, right? He just, again, I think it's okay. Like, I think it's cool, that this is a guy who loves basketball, but he has other priorities in life. So I think that's going to be kind of interesting to see play out. And don't get me wrong, I don't think there's any way he retires right now, at least for another contract. My guess is if we ever see him retire early, it'll be like, mid to early 30s. So I definitely think they still have a championship window, but I do think that's going to be interesting to watch these next few years. It's kind of to see, if that attitude he has still stays the same. Because if it does, I just think, it definitely makes it interesting for Denver, outside of the next 5-6 years.
Absolutely. So if we flip over to the Miami side, then I think Miami, again, the opposite of Denver. Miami's got a lot of questions heading into this offseason. I think if you're Miami, you also kind of felt at the back of your mind that this was the year to go get the chip. They've come so close the last couple of years. They had the finals run in 2020. Last year, they were one shot away from making it to the finals again. And I think when you're looking at Miami internally, the core still has to revolve around Butler. I think Butler has proven that he is the guy. Although he might have kind of slowed down at the end of this playoff run, I don't think there should be any serious doubt about Butler's ability to lead a team back to the finals. I think it's the process of getting there and how they can better support him, and not Jimmy Butler having to burn himself out in round one against the Bucks, right? Being the 8th seed really put them at kind of a detriment going into this playoff run. When I look at the holistic image of the Miami Heat roster, I think the development of the undrafted players is the primary question for me, because I wonder if there's a ceiling there. And not to take any credit away from those players. I love Duncan Robinson, Caleb Martin, Max Strus, Gabe Vincent. But I do wonder, everyone says, the scouts scouted that way for a reason. And while some things slip through the cracks, I do think there is some value in thinking that these players were undrafted, not necessarily for a reason, but because people might have seen a lack of long-term potential or long-term growth. And I just wonder if there's a lower ceiling for those undrafted players than there might be for other guys in the league. Again, Bam, I think, really showed that he can be a true number 2, one of the best defensive centers in the league, and he more than held his own on the offensive end when you're going against arguably the best player in the world. I don't think you can ask much more from Bam. And I think, like we mentioned last podcast, the question surrounding Tyler Hero and how much of a difference he would have made for that Miami Heat offense. That being said, I think Pat Riley and that front office, they're not the type to really just sit on their hands and let the season kind of come to them. I think they're going to go get it. So I do wonder what Miami does moving forward. The last point I had there is really the aging veterans question, right? For the first season, Miami's not going to have Haslam on that bench. And I don't think the value of him has been overstated. I think Miami highlights it for a reason, and I think it's integral to Miami Heat culture. So I'm curious to see how they kind of foster not a new culture, but a variant of it, because they don't have the same locker room going into next year.
Yeah, see, and again, I have to disagree with you. I think that this was not the year for them to go and get a championship if it felt like one. To me, that was last year. This year, I just think kind of, the writing was on the wall, more of a, it was one last hurrah for Udonis. And like you said, the 4th most injured roster in the league. They didn't have their second best offensive player, arguably best offensive player on the court the entire playoffs, or not the entire playoffs, excuse me. When it mattered, though, down the stretch, I mean, he really could have helped in that Nuggets game. A lot of those games are close, 10, 15-point swing every game, and we're looking at this series completely differently. So I do think a lot of the veterans are just, I love Kyle Lowry. He's maybe my favorite player of all time, but he just can't play extended minutes anymore. Same thing with guys like Kevin Love. You saw it pretty early that they're good for 15 minutes a game, but when you're getting in these slugfest series like the Boston one right before your finals run, that's wearing out those old guys. And I do agree, though, with your take on the undrafted players. Again, I think they're fantastic players, but I don't know if that necessarily is the situation for them to exceed. Expecting Caleb Martin to average 20 a game, I don't know if that's realistic. And that's not because he's not a great player, right? He's in the NBA. He's obviously of that caliber, but no, there are just other guys who kind of have made that kind of their whole purpose. These undrafted guys usually are more of the things, more specialist players, right? Duncan Robinson with his shooting, right? So you think of them as more specialized. So I think, when you get a superstar, you think of them more in a traditional sense of being able to do it all, where I just don't think you can get that with undrafted players. So I do agree with that, but I disagree I think Miami Heat are going to retool harder than ever going into this next season. Maybe have a 2-year plan to get back into contention, so then Jimmy can have, last few years with a competing roster. But I definitely don't think this was the year for them, but I do think they'll bounce back. Pat Riley's like the godfather of basketball. I mean, and Eric Spoelstra's, I still think, the best coach in the NBA.
So I guess my question then I would throw back to you is, would you run it back just with the way the roster is right now? Because when I kind of look at the last 4 years, they had the finals run in 2020, like we mentioned. They had kind of a strange year in 2021. 2022, they're back in the Eastern Conference Finals. They're at a Game 7 with a chance to go to the finals again. And then this year, they do make it back to the finals. Obviously, there are various reasons why they fell short. But I guess on my end, I'm looking at, you have a 4-year run where you're so close, but you never get over the hump. And, they always say about insanity, doing the same thing over and over again, trying to expect a different result. Where do you go if you're Miami? Like, do you just think that the solution is like, eventually, right, you're going to all be healthy at the right time and the chips are going to fall your way? Or is there a move that you see Miami can make?
It's not even necessarily that there's a move I think you should make. I'm just really of the mindset, and I always have been, if you are not winning consistently and at a clip to where you are a title favorite, there's no reason you shouldn't be moving pieces. It's one of the reasons I've always applauded the Lakers, because when their lineups don't work, they're very quick to turn around a roster. They did it notoriously in Kobe and Shaq's tenure, as well as, Kobe's late into his career, and now LeBron's. And I hate big market teams, but I love the way they just understand that this really is a business, and holding on to a player, and thinking he's going to work and he doesn't. Some players just aren't meant for teams, like Russell Westbrook, I said for forever. And then look at him with the Clippers. He had a breath of new life in him. He made them contend against a far superior Phoenix Suns roster without their 2 best stars, and they were competitive because of that emergence of Russell Westbrook and showing, hey, you really can just not be put in a place to succeed. So if I'm the Miami Heat, I'm retooling. As much as I think they're old guys, I think with Udonis Haslem retiring, to me, that is the, switch over to the new guard, right? Keep Jimmy Butler. He's your true leader. But besides that, I'm moving pieces. I'm trying to make a splash. Maybe trading for Dame, right? Maybe that's the move. Give some offense on that team, right? There's plenty of things I think they could do, but to me, it's just the fact that I think they need to do something more than anything.
For sure, and I do want to give credit to the Heat, right? They've had the most playoff wins over the last 4 seasons. That's with never having won the title, so that's an incredibly impressive statistic. And again, I think
very sad, depending how you look at it.
And they've every single year, no matter what roster they've brought into the postseason, they've been as competitive as anyone else, right? Not just reflective in the wins, but just watching the games play out. So I'm still high on Miami, right? Jimmy Butler, I think he's definitely not even a top 10 player in the regular season, but I think he's inarguably top 5 come the postseason. And when you have one of those guys, I think you're right. I think you can keep running it with the core of that, at least the culture, the coach, the player, until the player's not there anymore, because there's only a handful of guys like that in the NBA. So when you have one, I think you have to take advantage of that.
Yeah, and I always, again, in the modern NBA, I look to the Warriors in terms of building a dynasty, and it's, you keep 2 or 3 core pieces, and everything else shuffles. You know what I mean? Like, you really don't need that much to stay the same, because basketball at the end of the day is a business about winning and making more money, and I think as great as loyalty's kind of dead on both sides of the spectrum. Teams don't want to pay, players want to get paid the most or win, right? There's different levels to it. So if And now again, I think there are certain guys you have to hold on to, right? Nikola Jokic, that's a guy the Nuggets should never let walk. It'd be a mistake if they don't. Steph Curry and the Warriors, there's examples, don't get me wrong, where I think loyalty does apply, but for the everyday player, as sad as it is, it just doesn't exist like it used to anymore. These career guys, it's so much more rare. And why do you think now we're seeing the Ish Smiths and Jeff Greens of the world? Because if there's a good player, you just want to go and get them, and they understand that they're a plug and play guy. They can fit in almost any culture. So I just think because of the way culture's changing and looking at how the teams have won in the last few years, it really is about just optimizing what you have around your core, and having good coaching as far as you can. Or have Giannis Antetokounmpo, because that is still one of the enigmas to me. They won really off one guy's shoulders.
Well said. Well said. I don't think I could say that better myself. And so with that, I think we'll hop over into our B block. And with our B block today, Drake and I really wanted to hone in on the offseason, free agency, the draft, and some moves that some of these teams that are kind of been sitting in the middle might be able to make this offseason. I think given the recipe of winning over the last couple of years, we've had 5 champions over the last 5 years. I think a lot of teams out there really believe that given the right move, they can make a run at the title. And I think with that, I think we're seeing better parity over the last couple of years. Again, 5 champions in 5 years, not really seeing any type of dynasty run. I think it'll make for a very interesting offseason. So we'll kick it off with the Toronto Raptors, Drake's favorite team, although he's never been in Toronto, I don't think. And so they've got a lot of looming free agency decisions here. Pascal Siakam, obviously, some decisions have to be made there. They've got a ton of cap space. They've moved on from Nick Nurse, and I think Toronto really needs to decide on a direction to go, whether that's doubling down on winning now or building towards the future. Drake, what are your thoughts with your Raptors right now?
So with the new hire of the Serbian head coach, I looking at his kind of, what he has been, as well as, our management, right? We're very good at developing players. We just struggle with veteran acquisition. Now we pick a head coach, and he's even more so focused on player development. So to me, that really spells, again, as well as the rumors of them trading up to 3, that they want Miller or Scoot. When I'm looking at it, I'll be honest, I think 2 and 3 are way more favorable positions than 1. Victor Wembanyama, to me, as great of a prospect as he is one of the biggest risks of a player we've ever seen in the modern era, right? So to me, I look at Scoot and Brandon Miller as archetype guys. Brandon Miller's, sort of this Anthony Edwards type offensive freak, super young too, just like Ant was. And then you look at a guy like Scoot, who's been playing with pro level guys and dominating at that level, right? He, just an elite passer, even though he does play the 2, and he kind of a swing guard, right? Can do it all. I just think if I'm the Raptors, I want one of those guys. Them and Scotty are enough, I think, honestly. I think that can be your 2-headed monster. Scotty Barnes is sort of this more offensive focused Draymond Green is what, people have called him due to his just kind of do-it-all mentality. And you get a guy like Scoot or Brandon who's very offensive focused. I just think there's your 1-2 punch, and then you can just put guys around them. And I'm very big on guys like Gary Trent as well, OG. But I know OG has picked up some interest recently from the Pacers, so I would not be surprised if they ship him off again for young players. They have a lot of interesting players on the Indianapolis Pacers. I am personally Chris Duarte. Started out so strong as a rookie. I know he's kind of older, but he played a ton of minutes, and then as Tyrese started playing more and more minutes, his minutes declined, and now he just kind of doesn't do anything for him. And there's other players as well, but so if I'm the Raptors, I just don't think this core is going to win. I'd blow it up. You have $40 million projected for next year in free agency, and that's not to say if you move Siakam too, which I think is another move they should make. So if I'm the Raptors, I really am looking at next year as it's going to be one of those years you're a 20-30 win team, but it's because that's what you're going to have to do to get over the hump.
And I think the Raptors just have to commit to that. I think when you have such a long list of players that you've been shopping publicly for quite a few consecutive years at this point, I think it gets to a point where the players in the locker room no longer can believe and buy into a central culture. I think that's really integral to teams that kind of sit in the middle, where you're in this, we don't commit to either direction, and so the players don't commit one way or the other as well. And so really I think it's just most important that the Raptors commit to that direction, if that's the direction they choose to go. And I think the moves that you pointed out and kind of their hopes with the draft would be the way to go. With that, I think we'll flip over to the 76ers. And again, the Sixers are in a spot with they're one of those teams out there right now where it's like, we feel like we can win, but we don't know how to win right now. And I don't necessarily know if the answer for the Sixers lies out there in free agency. There's been rumors about Fred VanVleet. Sounds like he's not wanting to go to the Sixers anymore. Maybe it's a riff with Nick Nurse. Obviously, the Harden question is looming, and then there's been murmurs about a trade for Bradley Beal. I just go back to, I think it's a pivotal point for Embiid's career to prove that he can really win. To be the only MVP to never make it into the conference finals is a very concerning statistic, to say the least, and not to say that he doesn't have a host of excuses, but at the end of the day, NBA history is just going to go by the results. So I don't know what move is the right one for the 76ers, but curious to hear your thoughts here.
I'm kind of, though, in the same camp. Is I really don't know either, because, again, on paper, they have a fantastic roster. The only thing I'm kind of, I think that they should do is I think Maxey, can be the number 2. I really do. After watching the playoffs, he really played some of the best playoff basketball for the Sixers. And I know Embiid obviously was dealing with injuries, and, Harden played some fantastic basketball. But at the end of the day, still, I think if you're the Sixers, I would trust Maxey, as well as, again, you're getting a guy like Nick Nurse, who's notoriously had great point guard play in his years where he was prevalent. Kyle Lowry and Fred VanVleet were both putting up 27 and 6 every game in the finals against a very talented Golden State team. So I think he's going to even get more out of Maxey, maybe improve as a passer, as well as playing under Harden the last 2 years. And again, as the decisions loom, not really sure what they need. If I'm being honest, I just don't think Tobias Harris. I just think he doesn't really fit what they're trying to do. So if I'm them, I might be trying to move him and his contract as well. I know that's a big part of it. Is he has not the best contract, as a lot of players, veteran players, kind of fall into. And I think a guy like Bradley Beal could be interesting, just because, if I'm being honest, I don't think Washington's going to get that much for him. I think we're going to be like, oh, Washington was fleeced. But if you look at it, Bradley Beal's getting older. His whole kind of style of play is around high volume scoring. So, he needs the ball in his hands to really be effective. So I think if the Sixers could get him for maybe just a first or two and some players off the bench, I think Reed off the bench, right? That was a young player who shined in the playoffs. I definitely think they have the pieces, but I just think they kind of need to shift it up a little bit, especially if Harden doesn't come back. No point in doing the same thing over again.
And to your point about the contract, or just the larger point about Beal, I think the new CBA makes it a real concern for teams taking on max contracts with extended years, right? Because it's really a very long commitment to a player. And when you're paying out those max dollars, where understanding under the new CBA, the luxury tax is less flexible, the repeater is even more intense than before. I don't know if that's the direction the 76ers want to pivot. They're trying to get off of Harris's contract just because it's a max, right? I don't think it's necessarily a dig at Tobias Harris and his production. I think it's just, why are we paying this guy this much money? And I think Beal might bring a lot of those same problems. You took my 2 main points away, and I think it's around the same wavelength when it comes to the Sixers. But I think the questions have to be, does Maxey get better? Because if he can be a number 2, I think it adds a different dimension to that offense. And then the Nick Nurse effect. Is Nick Nurse able to come in and transform the way that defense plays, transform the culture in the locker room? Sometimes you just need a change at the helm, and that's not a dig at Doc Rivers, although I think there are many coaches better than Doc Rivers out there. Sometimes
I think it should be a dig at Doc Rivers, dude. That was
that's
terrible.
That's fair.
These players are terrible.
That's fair. And so I think my hope would just be that Nick Nurse has that kind of lift factor for the 76ers roster. I think we can pivot to Portland next. And again, Portland's one of these teams where they've sat a lot in that gray area over the last decade or so. Getting to the conference finals is an achievement, but when you have a talent as good as Damian Lillard, it feels like an underachievement. Portland seems to be tied to Dame as long as Dame wants to be there, and Dame seems to want to be there just because it's Portland. But then they've got this sticky situation with owning the rights to the number 3 pick right now. Here again, I'm kind of puzzled. I think you have to move off of Damian Lillard, but just the dynamic there seems so committed, I don't think they will. I wonder what Portland does with the number 3 pick, if you have any thoughts.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the best way to phrase it, is as like, it seems like they both like each other so much. They're making each other a ton of money. And again, it's Portland. It's never going to be a large market like a lot of these other teams. So I wonder if they're just okay with it, because everyone loves Damian Lillard. I don't know if I've ever met an NBA fan who doesn't like Damian Lillard. He's just so likable and has some of the coolest moments in the entire NBA. The Paul George game winner, the Rockets game winner, the 70 points. Like, the dude has just done everything, and I think his offense is just so fluid, and his stroke his shot is just so nice. So if I'm Portland, I think you could get a lot for that number 3 pick. It sounds like it might go to the highest bidder. And if that's the case, I really do think they could build a winning roster around him. I loved Jeremy Grant on there this year. I still did throughout the end of the year. So if they could pick him back up, Anthony Simmons looks to be a star, but I definitely think there's things you could do if you're Portland, and I think it starts with, if you want to keep Dame, get rid of that number 3 pick, but man, you are going to get a haul for that in return, because it really just feels like there's going to be 4 or 5 teams that are going to be fighting for it.
And the formula for winning today, right, it feels a lot different than it did a couple years ago. And by that I mean, committing to one player a long time ago, I think over the last couple of years, people have had this shift towards, you can't do that. You have to move off a guy's loyalty's dead in the NBA. But then we see these instances of Giannis, Steph, Jokic, and while they might be outliers, as of recent, it looks like a trend. And so I'm with you. I'd love to see Portland move off of that number 3 pick and really bring in a superstar level forward or center or whatever, whomever it may be, to pair it with Damian and say, Dame, you're a true number 1. We gave you as good of a number 2 as there is in the league. Let's go get it done. And I'm rooting for Dame. Like you said, he's one of the most likable players in the NBA. His story, there's no story out there better than Dame's. And I think basketball fans are at this interesting crossroads where everyone wants to get on the players for not being loyal to these teams. But at the same time, all general fans seem to think about is, who won the ring. That's all that matters in today's NBA. And I respect that Dame has not bought into that ring culture and that he's willing to stay so loyal to a franchise that has been loyal to him. I would just love to see them move off of that number 3 pick and see what they get in return. I guess staying on the topic of these trades then, we can move to kind of considering some players that might be traded or moved this offseason just because of different dynamics they have within the team. To me, there's a couple players that stick out. I'd start with guys like Jaylen Brown, Zion Williamson, and Jordan Poole. I don't know if any guys have stuck out to you as a potential trade destination, or maybe they need a change of scenery. But yeah, what are some trade potentials that you kind of see potentially on the horizon?
So I think the one certainty is that I think Jaylen Brown's gone. Now, I don't know where to, because I've seen a shockingly little amount about it in terms of on Twitter as well as, the sports forum. So kind of surprised by that. I do think maybe like Miami almost could be a team, kind of a sleeper, but not really sure. Jordan Poole too. I just really think it was a slump, right? You get the big contract. It's kind of hard. And I do think he is the successor to the Splash Brothers. I've said that for a while. I really do think if Steve Kerr wants to continue coaching, as Klay Thompson really just looks like he's never going to be Klay Thompson again at the level he was pre-injury, I think Jordan Poole's a guy, who could become that sort of number 2 for Steph, move him as a true shooting guard. Obviously not nearly as good on defense, but still has good length and size and speed. The one I will say, though, is for Zion, I think he needs a very strict coach or a player's first coach, because in New Orleans, it really just seems like he's lost his love for basketball. So I think there's a few ways you go about it. What I think would be really interesting is him going to New York. Now, I don't know how it happens, but it seems like after Julius Randle played absolutely terrible in the playoffs, they might be needing a new forward, and I think Zion would be an interesting fit. And Tom Thibodeau loves basketball more than maybe anyone on the entire planet. So I think if there's one guy who could yell some sense into Zion, I think it could be him. But he also could take that the other way, right? And then, play even less and lose his love even more. So, but I just think with RJ Barrett already there, there's kind of that Duke connection, and I'm not saying I think, a change of scenery is what he needs. I just think more than anything, he needs someone to talk some sense into him, kind of the Ben Simmons effect, right? Ben Simmons just kind of waited for so long, let the, thoughts fester, and now look at him, he doesn't even play. So don't want that to happen to Zion, one of the most electric players on a basketball court when he's healthy. What was it, 27 points as a rookie? I mean, just unbelievable. No one could stop him in the NBA. It looked like he was in high school still. So I'd love to see him back on a court again.
I could have sworn you stole my notes before the show, because everything I had to say about Jaylen Brown, Zion, and Jordan Poole, you said for me. I think one thing I would add about the Jordan Poole situation is the Warriors internally have now said that A, Steph wants to run it back with the core, B, they believe that Draymond Green and Jordan Poole's beef can be resolved, and C, they think that Jonathan Kuminga potentially could be traded to move up in the draft. And to me, those are just 3 incredible controversial statements coming out of Golden State. Steph's Steph's commitment to the core, to me, I think is probably a blind spot for Steph, right? And I understand it. When you've gone through as many battles as the Warriors have done, I think at one point you just feel so committed to guys like Clay and Draymond that he's never going to be the one to say we need to move off of that. But I think at one point, again, when you fell short a couple of times and you know that your core is aging, I don't know if that's necessarily the smartest move. On the Jordan Poole point, it's already been a year, and Poole has clearly not moved on from that punch. I don't know why just another summer makes any difference. I could be entirely wrong. I'm obviously not internally with the Warriors. I don't see what happens inside of that locker room, but I thought that was curious. And then the point about moving off of Jonathan Kuminga also was mind-blowing to me. I don't understand why the Warriors would want to move up in a draft to develop a young guy when they've tried to do that for the past 4 years and failed with every single one of their projects. And not to say that Moody or Kuminga won't become a good player, but they aren't right now. They saw 0 minutes in the playoffs. And so just curious decisions coming out of Golden State. I guess one player that's come up, and this can pivot us to the next one here. The CP3 twilight era of his career, where does he land? I saw Golden State as a potential option. To me, I think there's two directions, right? Does Chris want to go win a ring, whether that be with Golden State, Boston? Does he consider either of the LA teams? Or does he want to take on a mentorship role and do something similar to what he did with OKC all those years ago, whether it be with Houston or San Antonio?
Or the Hornets.
Or the Hornets, yeah.
LaMelo Ball,
where do you think
similar
CP3
play
goes
style?
here?
I think it'd be interesting to see him go back to the Hornets. I know they didn't treat him the best, and he always wanted out of there, but I just think that would be interesting, as well as I think it would help LaMelo Ball out a lot, especially considering how, with all of his size and length, he's still just pretty lackluster on defense. Maybe Chris Paul could show him, Chris Paul is one of the best at just poking a dribble out of a guy's hand. I'm not even sure if Chris Paul is necessarily as an elite defender as we all kind of think, just because his steal numbers are so inflated, because the dude's just so good at getting the basketball. So I think that's kind of my dream scenario for him, because again, I don't know if there's any teams he could go to guaranteed get a ring, especially with how much parity there is in the league right now, right? 5 different champions in the last 5 years. I don't know if there is sort of a, super team right now that is so much ahead of the rest that he could join, right? I don't think the Nuggets are at that level. I think they're close, but with a guy like Nikola Jokic, I feel like that completely devalues Chris Paul and what he does best. So I think the Hornets would be interesting, and I know that's mentor role, not necessarily a contender, but I just think him and LaMelo, I think he could help him out a ton and maybe become, again, I think LaMelo Ball has an interesting skill set. I think he could become a fantastic player, especially with one of the greatest point guards of all time mentoring him.
Great take. I really like that. Hadn't considered the Hornets, but I think it's a really good fit on paper, and I think the way it played on the court would be super fun to watch as well. With that, I think we'll hop into our C block then. To close today's show, Drake and I wanted to bring back one of our favorite segments from a couple pods ago, being Twitter Take. So Drake and I went on Twitter, pulled a couple of our favorite tweets, and we're going to kind of just discuss, either the irony or the joke behind them here a little bit. So Drake, you want to kick us off?
Yeah, so this one isn't even just, as funny as a lot of the other ones. This one I just thought was really cool. Jeff Green wore a Seattle Supersonics cap for the Nuggets parade today. And I just think that's awesome. And once again, it reiterates the fact that we need an expansion and Seattle needs a team back, because I still think some of the coolest jerseys ever, like a Ray Allen Sonics jersey, is about as cool as a vintage jersey can get.
Absolutely. That is really cool. I like the homage being paid there.
Yeah.
So, that's a fun one. I'll stick on the kind of the winning team veterans here with DeAndre Jordan. Bleacher Report had put out a tweet shortly after the Nuggets won the championship. DeAndre Jordan was the first player in the Lob City era to win a ring out of the core there, and I just thought that was so funny. So much was made about, Blake Griffin, Chris Paul, JJ Redick, and it's DeAndre Jordan of all guys to get his ring.
I think we can be honest with ourselves. I don't know if Blake Griffin has ever been a fantastic player. He just can jump really high and had maybe the best passer in NBA history throwing it to him. But Chris Paul not winning one's insane. But then you remember how much of just kind of an a-hole he is to even his own teammates. So, again, it's honestly not super surprising. DeAndre Jordan just seems like a nice guy compared to the
he's heralded as a great teammate.
I love Redick.
Comes around.
Yeah, I love Redick, but he's very intense. So,
yeah.
My next one is I was loving the Nuggets. I love the parades afterwards, because I just think it's so funny to see these superstar athletes as normal people, right? Just celebrating. It seems almost childish, right? To be celebrating a trophy for winning basketball, right? That's I think a third grade, and it was KCP. He did the 2-beer shotgun where he the Stone Cold Steve Austin where he smashed them together. And I just think it's so funny because this is a dude who's in his 30s and he's celebrating a basketball trophy, which you take some context out of it and how much money they're getting paid, and it's just kind of a ridiculous thing to do to celebrate.
I think for some of those players in those locker rooms, I think the parade is probably the best day of their life. I'm not going to lie, because some of the stuff that they say and the way they look on those parade floats is absolutely insane to me. But you love to see the players celebrating it because it is so hard to win a championship. So credit to the Nuggets. I'll go to a player that lost to the Nuggets here. I saw a tweet that was asking, what's an NBA performance that isn't talked about enough? And someone had responded to that tweet, January 9th, 2020. Tristan Thompson's career high. He had 35 points, 14 rebounds, and 3 blocks in a win for the Cavs against the Pistons. Tristan Thompson would have to be top 3 in my list of least likely NBA players to have a 30-point game. That's just bonkers to me.
I guess so. I mean, he is just such a layup guy, you know what I mean? It's like the Corey Brewer 50-point game, if you know anything about that.
Yeah.
He scored like 38 of the points on layups. That's kind of the Tristan Thompson beat, right? I could see a game where a team's just not playing the interior or their center's out, and Tristan Thompson, I mean, dude's got like an 8-foot wingspan and he's not super tall, but I could see him just putting, and again, he had the 15 rebounds. I guarantee half of his points were like double chance, under the rim buckets.
Probably, yeah. I mean, the 14 rebounds is honestly the surprising part of me in correlation with the 35 points. Because to me, if Tristan Thompson had 35, I would have had to guess that he had 20. To your point about the offensive rebounds, I would have thought that 6, 7, 8 of those buckets were coming off offensive boards. I guess I didn't look at the breakdown there. Maybe it was that way.
Yeah, I don't know. And then my next one, this is less of a joke. My next two are kind of more serious, but this one was about the number 15 on the Nuggets. Carmelo Anthony famously wore it, but now with Nikola Jokic wearing it, I really just think it's a question of is Nikola Jokic the best number 15 the Nuggets have had? I just don't see how you can say Carmelo was better on the Nuggets. Now, as a player as a whole, I think there's an argument, but I just think it's interesting that already, at not even 30 years old, Nikola Jokic has done more for the Nuggets than Carmelo ever did, despite being one of their most iconic players.
I think you really took my show notes before the show, because my third tweet was also something about Melo and the jersey retirement. My tweet reads, yeah, Melo can kiss that Denver retirement jersey goodbye, Bubba. And, you did a good job of outlining it there. I just think it is so sad for Melo that the year he chooses to retire, Nikola Jokic cements himself as inarguably the best player in Nuggets history. And I don't think it was an argument after the 2 MVPs, but now there's no way that you can ever make an argument for Melo. And that's not to take away any credit from what Melo did. Jokic is just kind of in that tier above players like Melo. So good tweet there.
Yeah. And then my last one was about Victor Wembanyama, as everyone loves to talk about him all the time. And it was Chandler Parsons, of all people, saying that he's one of the greatest draft prospects of this generation. Now, again, whenever people throw around the term greatest draft prospect, it always makes me laugh, because there's always these, LeBron Jameses that, I'm sorry, that just on paper, you can't tell me that a kid who's 7'5" is a better prospect just because of his athletic profile, because with that athletic profile comes a very scary thing, and that is the amount of injuries. So I polled all players 7'5" and above in NBA history to kind of get a sample size. Now there's 9 of them, okay? Of those 9, the average career is 6 years, which is over the NBA's average, which that surprised me. So I was like, okay, that's kind of cool. The average NBA career, for those of you who don't know, is around 4 or 5 years. So again, 6 years isn't too bad. The average weight of these players was 288 pounds. Victor Wembanyama is currently 206 pounds. So he's got a long way to go there. I mean, a whole adolescent child's weight added on to his, just to even be at the average, let alone the guys who played long careers like Sean Bradley or Yao Ming. Now, obviously, there were some, like Manute Bol, most notably, played at 200 pounds, which is crazy. But being such a gadget player, right? Blocks and three-pointers, I don't know if Victor Wembanyama's play style really translates. And then this is the big stat for me. Combined All-Star appearances, only one of those 9 players had an All-Star appearance, and it was Yao Ming, who was the anomaly, right? So looking at it like that, Victor Wembanyama has to be the anomaly of all players similar to him to even be able to be considered a valuable draft pick, in my opinion. I've notoriously been low on him. I have tons of friends who give me tons of crap about being so low on him. If there's a guy to be able to figure him out, I do think it'll be Greg Popovich. But if I'm a team, I think picking 2 and 3 is so much better than 1, because at 1 you have to take this guy who, again, I think it can be done to where he becomes a long player in the NBA, but numbers are not on his side. And so I'm much higher on Scoot and Brandon Miller out of a concept of you don't have to reinvent the wheel with them. Scoot is a swing guard who can do it all. Brandon Miller's a high volume scorer like Ant Edwards. Things we've seen before. What is Victor? We've never seen anything like him, which could mean there's a reason, or it could just be that no one's been that good yet, right? So, and I kind of lean more towards I just don't think it can be done on high volume and consistently.
I think you make a great point there, especially about the pick. And I wholeheartedly agree with you there. It depends on the year, right? Sometimes it's a number 2 pick, sometimes it's a number 3 pick, but very often it's the number 1 pick, and you're put in that really poor position of you don't want to be the team that didn't take that guy. Because what if Victor Wembanyama becomes the greatest player in NBA history, a top 10, a top 15 guy? But also, what if he's a bust? But I think teams in those front office seats can't sit there and go to sleep at their job not picking that guy. And I'm with you. I don't think Wembanyama's gonna be that guy, and it's just the health for me. There's nothing against his game, but just seeing his frame, the way he plays, and the statistics, everything you laid out, it's the NBA history is against him. And, I'm going to hope that he has a super successful career, because it would be so fun to watch a 7'5" guy dominate the league. I just don't think it's going to happen. And you said it exactly right. The number 1 pick, worst position they could be in, because they have to take him. And with that, they're taking a 50, 60, 70% chance that he doesn't pan out the way they hope him to be. So I think that's a really great way to kind of frame that pick.
Yeah, but I do think him playing overseas ball makes it more interesting, because I feel like especially in the last few years, we've seen these guys who just dominate overseas, and it translates very well because being able to play professional ball at such a young age helps him. And so I do, like you said, I think he will be good when he's on the court. I just think just like Chet, right? Look, we were all so excited about him, plays very similar, right? He's sitting on the 3-point line, chucking threes, blocking shots down in the post, and then in the preseason he gets injured, and he's out for the season because of his ankle. And it was on a mundane, everyday type play. So I just don't know how Victor, when you get to the physicality level of the NBA where you're playing against the best of the best, I just don't know if that's going to translate.
Absolutely. I think that's a good place for us to come to a close with today's podcast. This is going to be the finale of our season 2 of the B-Sides of Sports. So thank you guys for tuning in. Drake and I have a lot of fun stuff planned for this offseason, and we're going to be super excited to pick up back next year with the NFL and NBA as those seasons pick up in the fall. But we will have tons of content coming out this summer. So thank you guys for tuning in, and we hope to see you back soon.